Welcome to Transformational Pathways, a podcast created by Toastmasters District 46 in the greater New York area, where we share conversations from influencers within the Toastmasters community and people whose lives have positively transformed by walking down the Toastmasters path. Whether you're just getting started in your career, have had recent career changes, or you're navigating different languages, we're here to help you build confidence by discovering new tools, overcoming your fears to find your voice, and engaging in a thriving community. Enjoy today's episode.
Hello, welcome to another episode of Toastmasters District 46 Transformational Pathways podcast. I'm your host, Scott Mason, and walking the pathway with us today is Marc Williams. Marc is an executive communications coach, a presentation consultant, keynote speaker, and author of the book, Beyond Limitations. Marc is also a TEDx speaker, and as if that wasn't enough, he has been an educator with the NYC Department of Education for 25 years. Marc, welcome to the show.
Hey, Scott, thank you for having me. I am so super excited to go down this path with you and transform as many people as we possibly can. I love your energy and I'm ready to go, my man.
We're going to have a battle of the titans here when it comes to energy levels. We'll see who wins at the end. Audience members, anyone listening or watching, make sure you leave it a comment. Who's more energetic? If you want to say both, that's maybe the best answer. Marc, talk to me a little bit. Are you from New York?
Brooklyn, born and raised in the words of Houdini. And East New York, Brooklyn. Well, I was born in Red Hook, Brooklyn, grew up in East New York, Brooklyn.
I love it. I love it. And you went to school here in New York City too?
Yes, I did. PS 224, LA Woodruff, IS 364, Brooklyn Technical High School.
That's hardcore. I love it. And if you're going to go to school, you might as well go to school here in New York. Now, talk to me a little bit about how and why you ended up with the New York City Department of Education. That is an intimidating place to work. It's both inspiring and terrifying. Talk.
All right. So here's how it all happened. I was sitting college journalism class because I had visions, dreams, aspirations, ambitions to become a journalist. I wanted to be on TV. So I took the intro to journalism class at NYU, which is where I went to college. Poor kid who went to college at NYU. Go figure, right? And I'm taking this intro to journalism class, and it's a big lecture hall, 200 people. We're taking tests, reading textbooks. And we had just taken, I don't know, it was a midterm exam or some important exam. And it was a few days later, and we got the exams back. Before the professor hands us back the exam, he says, so there's one person in the room who got a 36 on the exam. So I looked at my friend Dan, and I said, I quote you not, I wonder who's the idiot who got the 36. So the paper comes back and I open it up, and yes, Scott, I was the idiot who got the 36 on the exam, right?
I'm so sorry to hear that. That's horrible.
You know what? It was horrible, and yet it was a blessing all in the same place, right? Because after that, I got such a low grade in the class. I think I got a D in the class, whatever, and I went to my grade advisor, my guidance counselor, and she told me, if you want to pursue journalism, you're going to have to retake this course.
Wow.
Suddenly, my mother's voice is in my head as I transition. I'm sorry, Scott, I tell a lot of stories, right? But they're all connected, right?
I love it.
When I was about 10 years old, I went up to my mother and I said, Mommy, I'm hungry. And she said, all right. I said, well, can you make me a bowl of cereal? She says, go make it yourself. I said, I don't want to make it myself. If you don't want to make it yourself, then you don't really want it.
Oh.
Whoa. Let me tell you, those were the most transformational words I ever heard that I still use in my own home, right? So now that I've given that to you, right? Those are the words that are now passing through my head as my guidance counselor says, Marc, if you want to be a journalism major, you're going to have to retake the course. And there was something in me that said, I don't want to retake this class. And that's when my mother's voice said, if you don't want to take the class, then you don't really want to go into journalism, right? Mm-hmm. So now I had to think about what else I wanted to do. And I reflected on my time in high school. I reflected on a summer youth job that I had teaching elementary school kids during the summer. And I realized maybe teaching is my thing. I love words. I love telling stories, as you can tell. And I decided to become an English major and to become an educator and get my degree. And I ended up in the New York City Department of Education. That's how I became a teacher. Failed at journalism, succeeded in the classroom.
I love it. I absolutely. By the way, I was an English major too. What was your favorite literature?
Oh man, I actually love teaching adolescent literature. I think just as a kid, I was always looking for stories that I could relate to. That's probably why I can't relate to any of these characters. The Outsiders. Remember The Outsiders by S.E. Hinton?
Heck yeah.
Yeah, I can't relate to any of the white-haired, grease-haired white kids living in the middle of nowhere. I can't relate to that. But they were youth, right? They were kids.
Yeah.
So I've always liked literature about adolescence, which probably also explains why I became a teacher. I'm just very fascinated with the development, the growth, and the success of young people.
I love that. And we're going to talk a lot more about stories and young people as this episode goes on. So thank you for hitting that nail on the head. But let's roll up our sleeves and get to some meat, Mr. Marc. How on earth did someone as dynamic, charismatic, energetic, and dare I say, boisterous as you end up in Toast? Who said you needed to go to Toastmasters? What?
Oh, man. You know, it's so funny how so many people don't even know what Toastmasters is. And I didn't know. I had no idea. I was at Brooklyn Tech as I was in a role as an assistant principal. And I had spoken plenty of times at school events. And this one coworker, she was actually in an MBA program. And she asked me if I could give her some tips for a presentation for her class. And then she said, have you ever thought about public speaking or professional speaking? I said, no, that's such a thing. She goes, yeah. She goes, here, take this DVD. Yes, I said DVD.
I don't know what that word is considering you're only 22. And I'm only 21. Anyway, what is that?
Right? So she gave me this DVD pack, right? It was like this. It almost looked like an encyclopedia, and I opened it up, and there were like 3 different DVDs in there, and it was all about getting into the professional speaking business. Mm. So I popped one in, and it was like every minute, somebody was saying something about Toastmasters. So I'm like, what is this Toastmasters thing? And I looked it up, and I'm like, wow, I could join an organization or a club where I get to give speeches and listen to speeches. And then I heard they got this world championship of public speaking thing. Let me find out more. So it was the desire and the interest in being a professional speaker that drew me to Toastmasters.
That is a very important point to make, because when I myself have evangelized for Toastmasters, you get a lot of, well, wait, Toastmasters is for people that are afraid of public speaking, if they've heard of it, or maybe people that are attempting to deal with confidence issues. I've never had a confidence issue. I certainly have never been afraid of opening my mouth. It just happened. And yet I was drawn to it as well. And a lot of people in Toastmasters are like you. Now, they may not be at your level of skill yet, but they're not necessarily afraid. There is something fun about speaking to a lot of people. What would you say to encourage other people like you who might be saying, I don't need to toast. I'm too good of a speaker to be in Toastmasters. What is that going to offer me except looking at a bunch of people and helping them get better? What would you say to someone like that?
I would say, remember the name Kathy. I would say, remember the name Darren. I would say remember the name Mark Brown. I would say remember the name Jim Key, and there's so many other names. Listen, here's the deal. When I joined LIU Brooklyn Toastmasters now, right? When I joined, I had a great time and met some wonderfully nice people. But then I started going to these conferences, and then I started competing in the championship, and I started to meet some of the not only nicest, not only wise, some of the most talented speakers and people. And meeting them has helped me to grow. So I would say to anybody, I don't care what level you're at, there is somebody you can meet, somebody you can speak to, somebody you can come across who will just teach you things that you did not know. Can I tell you, I was getting ready to compete for the World Championship in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, 2014. And I was on a podcast that featured, I believe it was Greg Valentine. And he listened to my contest speech. And he gave me some advice about storytelling that I had just never thought of. And then right before I went to Malaysia, I was talking to Darren LaCroix, and he sent me one of his DVDs, and he taught me something about how to hologram and body language and how to tell a story through visual language, that concept that I had not thought about. So yes, I walked into Toastmasters feeling pretty comfortable with speaking in front of people, but I had no idea that there were things that I still had to learn. And if I'm a great speaker, if I'm a good speaker, if I'm a compelling speaker, if I'm a helpful speaker, if I'm a transformational speaker, it's only because I've come across people who have helped me, transformed me, taught me. That's why people who are into it need to get into it.
I love it. But I've got to ask another question that all of this raises, particularly for people who might be watching this and for those who are hearing you talk about your experience going to the international speaking competition. That is a massive achievement.
Thank you.
Winning is massive. Being there, being on the stage is a massive achievement. Let's face it, even winning the district contest when you are in New York City, where the competition is the stiffest on the planet, is a massive accomplishment. And I will not lie. I told you before this show started that I knew who you were before Natsuyo, who was a previous guest on this show, introduced us. I've been spying on you. So there was a Day of the Champions that Toastmasters had, the district had at the Queen's Library a couple of years ago, this fancy modern library. And you stood up there and you spoke. And you and Natsuyo and everyone else, but you were excellent. I remember that speech to this day. And what you brought to the table is what you're bringing into the studio right now. You brought confidence. You looked good. Your speech was substantive, and you had energy. Now, all of that's wonderful, but I'm someone who is scared of speaking. I'm the opposite end, or I'm just an ordinary person and I see a contest and I see you and I'm thinking, where can I even learn from someone like that? You have, and for those of you again who are listening, you can't see this, but you're tall. You have a powerful voice. You have a very strong physical presence. You're physically attractive. All of these things that people respond to. I may be small, physically fragile, quavering voice person who wants to get better, but I'm walking. Here I am feeling like a little lizard in a room full of dinosaurs. How do you deal with folks that might be looking at you and so in awe they can't even take in what you have to say?
And you mean what advice do I give them, or
what advice
do I
do you give them, and how do you talk to them, particularly about what Toastmasters can do for them, if anything?
Ooh. So there's a few things, and the first thing is, I got to tell you, Scott, the person you just described was little Marc Williams.
Oh,
I
stop.
was terrified. No, I'm telling you. I was a kid. I always tell this story about how I was in my second grade class with Mrs. McIntyre, and it was right around Christmas time, and she had the entire class sing the song, The Little Drummer Boy. I have serious psychological issues when it comes to the song, The Little Drummer Boy. I was with my family. It came on in the mall. The song came on, and I batted out of the mall. My family's like, what the hell is wrong with you?
This is terrible.
I've come to terms with it.
We all have to heal from the trauma.
Right? But in that moment, Scott, let's say I love speaking and I love music, but I can't sing. So Mrs. McIntyre picked up on that real quick, and she asked me to sing by myself because she knew somebody was singing out of key. So before my mouth could open, the tears started falling on my face, right? And I was just traumatized, and I never wanted to be in front of a group. And you know, listen, the other part of it is I grew up poor. I definitely had, you know, you talked about my book, Beyond Limitations. You read that book and you could see that I went through my own trials and tribulations and a lot of things that I wanted to hold inside. And so I was the exact person that you're describing. I did not want to always put myself out there. What I ultimately learned is so funny. We talked about storytelling.
Yeah.
I think I remember the first time in elementary school, we had a storytelling. It wasn't a contest, but a project. And it was the first time I ever stood up in front of a group of people and told a story. And it was a story I didn't make up. It was a story I found from someplace else. And I just kind of remember the reaction. And I felt very comfortable. And so one of the things I would say to anybody who's a little nervous about speaking up in front of people, find your comfort first in the stories around you. We use stories all the time in conversations. So just say what happened to you today, right? Or what you saw on the subway today. I got stories about that too, Scott. And that's what I would say. And right. And I would say when you come to a Toastmasters meeting, forget being world champion of public speaking. Forget being the next Tony Robbins or the Les Brown or the Eric Thomas. Just pick one thing that you would like to be able to do better. One thing that would make you feel a little bit better about yourself, and just focus on that. You don't have to be the next Tony Robbins. You just have to be the next version of you who's going to tell that next story that you just heard or experienced or lived through.
I love it. That actually kind of touched me. Okay, let me calm down here.
Yeah.
What makes a story good?
Ooh, that's a really good question. I would say what makes a story good is a story where other people can see themselves in it. I think that's a really big part of a story. I think what makes a story good is it's got to be short enough, and it's got to have some mixture of maybe a little bit of humor and maybe a little bit of drama, a little bit of conflict. And I think that's it too. It's got to have a little bit of conflict that makes the story. But I think that's the biggest part. It's got to be something that draws out some kind of emotion in you, you know? But I'll say this other one. So, you know, as speakers, we always think about in threes, right? So it's got to have a little bit of drama. It's got to be, you know, people who are hearing it have to see themselves in it. And this third lesson comes from one of my best friends in the world. I think he's an amazing storyteller. He would never join Toastmasters, even though he's the most dynamic and entertaining person, one of the most dynamic and entertaining people and storytellers I know. The reason why he is so amazing at telling stories is because every story he tells makes a point. He's never just telling a story for the sake of telling a story, you know, and it's something he's really humanity. So a lot of the stories he tells reveal something about humanity, and then it becomes a talking point, right? A story is a springboard for a conversation. So that's, I think, is what makes a story. I can see myself in it. You can see yourself in it. It's short enough. It's got some emotion. It's got some conflict, and it starts a conversation.
Talk to us about what it is like stepping on the stage at the International Convention. I can't even imagine. I've been to it. Anyone, by the way, who's listening and watching who has not been to one of these conventions, and especially when they go back live again, it is an overwhelming, incredible. I went alone. I didn't know anybody. I had the time of my life. And so, but I wasn't up on the stage. Tell us about what that's like for those who might be dreaming about this.
Oh, man. On one level, it's no different than stepping on any other stage, right? And that's something I always like to tell people. It's just another stage with another group of people whose lives you can change, right? But, wow. I don't know if I want to call it pressure, excitement, anxiety. I'm just, it's just a mixture of emotions, right? It's one of those things that starts on time when they say it's starting on time. So you're backstage, and here's something that's very interesting about it. I'm backstage with 8 other speakers, and we're barely talking to each other, right? Like it's like the camaraderie is out the. But it's not because we're like vicious animals trying to beat each other down. It's just that we're so in the moment, right? Where it's like you're almost there. And stepping onto the stage, it wasn't even about the crowd. And in Malaysia, it was like a 3,000 seat auditorium. So there were a lot of people.
Yeah.
It was just, it's the moment. It's like you're almost there. Like I can only imagine what a LeBron James feels like or felt like the first time he made it to the finals. How did Derek Jeter feel the first time he made it to the World Series? Like, wow, it's exciting and you feel so accomplished. And yet you feel, ooh, I'm not quite there yet.
Yeah.
And those 5 to 7 minutes were probably the longest and the shortest 5 to 7 minutes I've ever spent giving a speech.
Wow.
Yeah, it's crazy.
I love it. Now, how did the contest process benefit you, if at all?
Ooh, huge. When I decided to do the contest that year, I didn't know what I was going to speak about. I ended up telling somebody that I was going to speak about a time when I was running track and I fell down and I hurt my hip. And then eventually I ended up having to go to a doctor to get my hip checked out on the day that my stepfather passed away, right? And she said, wow, that's an interesting story, but it might be too heavy for people. And I'm like, okay. So she kind of pushed me to really think about what's something that's a little light, maybe a little humorous with a message. So that was one of the first lessons, right? Don't hit them too heavy. Give them a little bit of lightness, but give them a really important lesson.
Right.
And then I'm moving on in the contest and I'm making little changes here and there because I think it was in the division contest. I was giving the speech and the timekeeper, I think, raised her hand or something of that nature because she thought I was done. Oh, no, she stopped the clock because she thought I was done because of this one particular line.
Oh.
And I wasn't done, but I wasn't out of time. But that was really important because it taught me about where to place certain lines. I realized that the final line of the speech wasn't in the right place. I didn't have it at the final spot. So I had to learn how to restructure the speech to really maximize the effect. But I would tell you, I think the biggest, the part of the process and the biggest lesson from the process was when I was invited to do that podcast that I told you about earlier. And I called up my good friend, my good sister, Kathy, who I met through Toastmasters. She and I host our own web show. And I said, Kathy, I don't know if I should do this podcast because they want to practice my contest speech. And what if the other contestants hear it? She says, Marc, I love you, but nobody's going to change their speech just because they heard yours, right? And then she said this. She said, I want you to remember why you're really doing this. It's not to win a trophy. It's to share your message with as many people as possible. That right there was the lesson that changed me as a speaker and as a human being. What we do is for other people.
There is a lack of egotism that I would even say is intentional that I am hearing within that message. As an educator, talk to me a little bit about the relationship between the sublimation of the ego and the educational component or the educational value that Toastmasters might have to someone who is in the professional arena.
Wow. So, it's interesting, and that's a great question. First of all, when it comes to ego and education, I always tell people this. In order to be the secret to being an effective educator is understanding that even if you are in the front of the room, whether you're the sage on the stage or the guy by the side, whichever, fancy term you want to throw out, right? That it's always about the students in the classroom. And that's where, as educators, we always have to throw the ego out the door. Everything you do, everything you plan, every way you grade, every way you speak to students should always be about them. And that's the same thing in Toastmasters. And I think that Toastmasters does a really good job of that because I always hear people teaching that lesson. I often hear people eventually stop using the word I so much and start using the word you a whole lot more. So, I think it's so important as educators. It's funny, Scott, I think Tony Robbins does this more than anybody else. He calls professional speaking and motivational speaking the education industry. As speakers, as coaches, as individuals, whether it's your profession or not, we are all educators. And educators are always educating for the benefit of those who are being educated. So that's how you take your ego away, by always remembering what the purpose of speaking is. It's to educate and transform.
And in fact, I'm sure many would say that is always the ultimate purpose of speaking across the board. Yes, self-expression is a fundamental human need, and we all do have that desire and drive to be who and what we are in the world. But we are social creatures, and speaking, if it is to be pro-social, is almost inherently going to have embedded within it the need to, or the function of connecting with other human beings. Now, I raise all of that to go back to something that I saw on your website, which I did a little spying. I saw you. Okay, arrest me. Go right ahead. And I saw on your website that you've done some pretty impressive work with people that have come to you with resume issues or that have needed been looking for some sort of career change, particularly in the educational world. And so what I'm going to do is tie together 3 of your favorite subjects. Please don't tell me they aren't your favorite subjects.
Okay.
Education, career development, speaking/Toastmasters.
Yes.
Do you believe, as someone that specializes in career development through that work that you're doing on folks' resumes and getting them and coaching them in career directional changes, that Toastmasters has any value? Or is that something that you really feel is limited to people that are public speakers or that are within certain subsets of the workforce that might have communication or other issues?
Toastmasters is absolutely a great place for this, right? Because at the end of the day, from my perspective of doing career coaching and teaching people about resume writing and interviewing strategies, at the end of the day, what I have found career coaching to be about is getting people comfortable enough to talk about themselves. What's the hardest part about applying for anything? You got to talk about yourself. You got to brag about yourself. And that feels uncomfortable. Mama always said, be humble. Be humble, right? But when we want to put ourselves out there, well, dare I say it, Scott, the ego needs to seep back in at least a little bit so that you can be able to talk about what's so good about you that can help other people, right? And so Toastmasters, I think, is a really great place for us to be able to tell our stories, right? Talk about our strengths, talk about areas where we can grow, right? Mm-hmm. And Toastmasters, first of all, is just, by the way, it's also great to put on a resume, right?
And I don't know that people are aware of that. Talk to us about that for just 1 second, please.
Listen, one of the most important things you'll ever be asked or asked to talk about when it comes to career development and getting a job is, what are areas of weakness and what are you doing to grow in those areas? I haven't met a person who hasn't joined Toastmasters because they're not trying to improve in an area, develop in an area, advance in an area, right? So you're showing your own initiative. Nobody told you to join Toastmasters. Yeah. You're showing initiative and dedication towards your own growth and development. So it should definitely go on people's resumes.
That's actually really good advice. Thank you for that. Now, those that are listening can hear the energy and the vibrancy of your voice. Those who are watching will see a very dynamic physical presence. Lots of hand motions, shoulder motions. The head is moving. You're moving back and forth. It's actually very engaging and exciting. It's also highly individualized. I found that a lot of folks want to present in a way that is poised, or they have a fear of stepping into the size that is possible within a speaking opportunity from a physical perspective. How did you develop the ability to just be, boom, out there, everything moving? There's a lot of people that's a challenge. They don't even know where to begin with that.
Yes. First of all, I've learned to embrace my verbs, and I've learned to embrace my stories, right? Verbs.
Verbs.
There's
the V word.
The V word.
What are we swearing on this podcast?
Verbs are action words. They dictate things, and we have to remember that people get us more, and people get what we're saying more when they not only hear us, but when they see us. We are visual creatures. I always tell people we are visual creatures, and so I always say we need to play up to that. People sometimes shy away from public speaking being a performance. Sometimes performance is a dirty word in public speaking. I say let's stop separating all these things and merge them together. Public speaking, performing, visual, verbal, we got to put it all together, right? And I will tell you, the moment that I started to embrace my verbs, and the moment I started to embrace storytelling, and we've been using the word story today. Storytelling is so great for people who feel poised, because In order to bring a story to life, you need to put your body into it. That's there, right? That's why we love movies. That's why we got away from radio and started getting into movies, right? Because we want to see things. So give us something to see.
I think there were a couple of disco song titles in there. I like it. I'm wanting to move. I'm wanting to get my body moving, and even just thinking about it. That's incredible. But aren't people worried about making fools of themselves if they start throwing some shoulder into it and stuff like that?
So here's what I'll say. I was watching a video one day of the late great Steve Jobs, and it was a video when he was introducing the iPhone. And people talk so much about how amazing it is.
Yeah.
But if you go back and watch that video, and it's on YouTube, it's everywhere. Steve Jobs is all over the place, right? Yeah. He only used about 4 gestures in the first 7 to 10 minutes of that speech, right? And so, yes, I will be the first to tell you I am very animated. And I tell people all the time, you don't have to be animated like me. No. But if you could just think of 2 or 3 gestures, even if they're slight, to put into your speech or your presentation or your conversation, do it. Do it for you, for your growth, and do it for the receivability. That's not a word. The receivability of your message to other people. So pick 3 action words and act them out.
Well, but what that receivability, I want to grab onto that for a second, because one thing that when we're talking about verb usage, when you're talking about verb usage that seems embedded in what you're talking about, and I'm curious as to whether that's something we should think about more deeply, is the choice of language that we use isn't just a purely rhetorical set of opportunities for us, but if I'm hearing right, you're saying it actually has a psychological impact on how we present, in the ways our body moves, in the ways our voice comes out of our mouth, in the whole presence that we're creating. Am I understanding you correctly here?
Yes.
That's a profound statement that folks, if it's true, that folks are maybe want to think about.
Yes. Listen, we need to marry our action words with our actual words, right? And listen, we're not going to use the word data or spreadsheets, but the research.
Can I just get called out on a show I'm hosting? No one's dared to do that before. Those are some action words.
But like we've read so much about how these things come out. Have you ever seen my man Kevin Hart?
Kevin,
I love when Kevin Hart tells these stories. I'm thinking of this time when he was telling a story about carrying the casket of his dad, and he's mimicking all of these things. And we're just so drawn into it, right? And think about it for a second with stand-up comedians. They are very particular about their language, right? One word could change the dynamic of an entire joke. One word could change the entire dynamic of a story. One word could change the dynamic nature of a presentation. So yes, we really need to be intentional about the words that we're using. Right? So I said, do 2 or 3 gestures. Well, before that, make sure that there are 2 or 3 action words that you're incorporating into your language and use those to create opportunities to be visual. We want people to receive what we're saying. So remember that they receive it through the eyes. Listen, when my mother told me, well, if you don't want to make it, then you don't really want it. I still remember her neck swinging. I remember her shoulders. She put her body into that. I understand you, Mom.
I love your mother. I don't even know her.
Yeah.
I absolutely love this. So we're going to close out with a couple of pop-up questions I like to ask all of the guests. Be candid, keep it real, have a good time. Only 2 of them. Who is your favorite leader? And who is your favorite speaker? And why?
Oof. You know, I don't want to sound cliche, but I want to be honest and authentic. The first person who came to mind for me is Barack Obama, right? As far as a leader and a speaker is concerned, just the charisma that he has, you know, his ability to create a reputation where no matter what side of the fence you live on, right? No matter what side of the land you live on, there aren't too many people who have been compelled to say a bad thing about him, right? And that's because of the reputation that he's built through his words and the hope that he has given, right? He always talks about, yes, you can, right? So he's always given that hope and that transformational thing. And that's one of the things that I've always admired about him as a leader and as a speaker. And what I also admire about him as a leader and a speaker is the fact that I remember learning that he was the most mechanical, robotic speaker way before he was taught. You got to put a little bit more emotion into that, my brother.
I didn't know that. I don't think a lot of people knew that or would have ever imagined.
Yes. He needed Toastmasters. I don't think he ever joined, but he needed Toastmasters.
Well, I did hear someone say that he uses a lot of ums and ahs, so I know that he never went to us. But that's okay, because at the end of the day, the filler words are there. We want to control them, but again, if you disagree, let me know. It's the substance and the inside coming out that matters.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I always tell people with fillers, by the way, yeah, you'll never get rid of them. It's okay. Use your pauses when you can. People just want to know your message, you know? So we forgive you, fillers. We forgive you.
So, Marc, it has been great having you on the show today. Thank you so much for joining us and for sharing so much wisdom. Now, for those of you who are listening and watching, if you enjoyed Marc in today's episode, be sure to subscribe and leave a review or a comment. And before we move on to the final closeout, Marc, people I know are going to want to find out more about you. Tell us where we can look and get more of this energy.
All right. Well, I would love everybody to definitely check out my website, marcwilliamsspeaks.com. Hit me up on LinkedIn at Marc Williams. I'm on Instagram. I'm on Facebook. I'm also on YouTube. My good friend Kathy and I, we do a web show called It's About to Go Down with Marc and Kathy. So you can go to the website and look us up there. And I think those are all the different places where people can find me so that I can find them and we can vibe together. Let's bring this energy up to another level.
I'm down with that. So for those of you who have enjoyed this energy and want to try and get a little piece of it for yourself, don't forget to follow District 46 on Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, and Facebook. And if you're new to Toastmasters, check out our website at toastmasters46.org. That's toastmasters46.org. There, you can hear and learn, find out more about us, and visit one of our clubs. Toastmasters is where leaders are made.
Thank you so much for joining us on Transformational Pathways. If you enjoyed today's episode or got anything out of it, please rate, review, and subscribe. And if you're interested in learning more about Toastmasters District 46, check out the link in the show notes below.